Hey everyone, it's Joe Standley from FlightInstructorJoe.com. From everything I've been reading lately, the FAA is going to start requiring people to use ICAO flight plans for their domestic flights. This is supposed to happen by October 1st, 2016, from what I understand. And many people have not even used an ICAO flight plan before. So I decided to put together this little tutorial to give you an idea of what's coming up and how to use it. So this is a new flight plan form that you were going to be required to use. It's got three sections. The top section, the priority section. This is the first of three sections on the ICAO flight plan. You can pretty much ignore this section because it is to be completed by the air traffic facility. So you will never be using this. This leaves the message area right here. And the message area is this whole area right there. And this is where the main part of your flight plan would be. The supplementary information section down here is basically information which we'll talk about later too. So these are the two sections that you would be using. The top one, you wouldn't even use that. So let's review, starting with the top section here, what each of these boxes is going to be for. This is the main part of your flight plan where you would begin filling out the information. Starting with item number 7, this is the aircraft identification. This is where you put your aircraft tail number. So let's put a tail number in there, and we'll just put a fake tail number in there. So we'll just say we have aircraft 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The second box here is the flight rules. This is where you're going to file whether you are a VFR or an IFR flight. Now there's different sections here. If you look at the drop-down menu, we have I, V, Y, and Z. I is for IFR flights. V is for VFR flights. The other ones are for composite flight plans. The composite flight plan starting off IFR and then going to VFR. After that, you would use Y. A composite flight plan starting under VFR would use the letter Z. We're just going to do an example for an IFR flight today. So we're going to put I in there for an IFR flight. In the type of flight section, there's also a drop-down menu, and it has these different letters here. G, for example, which we're going to put in the type of flight, stands for General Aviation Flight. So if you're a General Aviation Flight, you're going to put G in that box. The other options for that drop-down menu, we have S, which is Scheduled Air Services, N, which is Non-Scheduled Air Transport Operations, M, which is Military, and X if there's any other kind of category not defined above. So those are the different sections and the different options, so you can see that we would be using G most of the time or all the time for a general aviation flight. Item 9, they want the number of the aircraft in the flight plan here. You can leave this blank and it will default to 1, or you can put a 1 in the box. But if you're doing formation flying with other aircraft, you would put the number of aircraft in formation in this box. So we'll just leave it blank here, but you could put 0, 1 right there if you wanted to. But if you were flying with anybody else, you would have to put the number of aircraft in that position. The type of aircraft, you must use the appropriate designator. The designators, we'll go over to the website and I'll show you in a second, but if you don't write it exactly like it's supposed to be, they will not accept it. So a good way to double check and make sure that you're putting the right designator in is to go to the ICAO website. So right here we have the International Civil Aviation Organization website, and we have this search box over here. So we want to search for the kind of airplane that we have. So we're just going to click on search. And there's some options here. We can choose a manufacturer. Let's say I want to choose a Piper because I'm not sure what my identifier is. Now some people put PA 28151, PA 28/151. There's different ways that people have put this in there. So if you don't know for sure exactly how it's supposed to be labeled, then you would go here just to double check to make sure you have it done the right way. We're going to narrow this down to a land plane with one engine, just so we don't have to go through a bigger list. So we're going to hit search right now. Now the search menu that comes up right at the top here is the type designator right here. So we have the list of the planes over here and the type designator. So we're looking for the designator. So we're going to slide down and we're going to look and see if we can find Piper Warrior, for example. That's what we'll just use for this example. So looking over here, I have found a Piper Warrior. We have a PA 28160 or a 151 or a 150. And if you look at the designators over here, they are all P28 alpha. So that's what we're going to use for our designator. So going back to the flight plan page now, the type of aircraft, this is where we're going to put P28 alpha, and that will take care of that. We also have a wake turbulence category. The wake turbulence category is dependent on the weight of your airplane. There are three different wake categories. There's light, medium, and heavy. And if you look at the drop-down list right here, we can see the different categories here. So light is to indicate the aircraft type with a maximum certificated takeoff weight of 15,500 pounds or less. So we're going to fall in the light category, so we're going to put an L there. Item 10 is next. This is where you would list out all the radio communication, navigation, and approach aid equipment and capabilities you have in your plane using a letter for each item. If you have standard NavCom approach aid equipment consisting of VHF radio, VOR, and ILS, then you can use the letter S, which stands for standard equipment. If you don't have the standard equipment or you have additional equipment, you will add the letters from the following list. So here's a list of some standard equipment that some general aviations would have that I've highlighted in red. For example, we have D, which stands for DME. We have L, which is for ILS, G for GPS, and O for VOR. So we know the standard includes an ILS and a VOR and the communication radios that we discussed. So we could have that, but if we had any additional equipment, we would add additional letters in there. So if you had the standard items plus DME and GPS, you would put SDG in box 10. If you don't have any equipment or none of the equipment is serviceable, use an N, which stands for nil. There's a little slash mark after the items you put in the box right here. There's a little slash right there. Right after that, this is where you put the type of surveillance equipment you have. So what do I mean by that? Surveillance equipment and capabilities. This refers to your transponder and ADS-B capability. Make sure you know what type of equipment you have and use the appropriate letter or letters for the equipment you have. Use one or more of the descriptors, but only enter one transponder code. So, here's a list of transponder codes. And you would choose from the list of what you have for your transponder code, and you would put that after the slash. If you had ADS-B, then you would find out what ADS-B information you have, and you would add that right next to the transponder. So if you had a transponder with mode C, you would put C right here. And then if you had, additional codes to add, you would add it right after that. And again, just as in the last thing, if you don't have a transponder or ADS-B or it's not serviceable, use N for nil. So we're just going to put SDG in this box here, and for our equipment capabilities, showing that we have the standard, and we also have DME and GPS. And after the hash mark here, we're going to put C, showing we have a mode C transponder. Box number 13 is the departure aerodrome, which means your departure airport. This is where you put your departure airport, and the line after that is where you put your estimated time of departure, just like you would with any other flight plan. So you'd put your 4-letter identifier of the airport in box 13 and the estimated departure time in Zulu time next to it. If the airport identifier has only 3 letters, such as 3 Charlie Kilo, then it is not recognized as an ICAO airport. In this case, you would put 4 Z's in the boxes instead. So we're going to go ahead and do that, and I'll explain in a minute. For the departure time, we're just going to put any example in here. We'll just say that we are departing at 1500 Zulu. Basically, most airports have a K in front of the name, like K DPA for DuPage or K ORD for Chicago. Those are ICAO recognized airports. One that does not have a K in front of it, usually with a number, is usually not recognized, in which case you would have to put ZZZZ here And then in the line 18 down here is where you would put the information about that airport. Now, I've personally talked to the flight service stations around here and asked if we could just put a K in front of it, and they said sometimes they recognize that and you can do that. I have noticed that flightplan.com does put a K in front of it in the actual flight plan, even though it does not have a K in front of it, and it seems to work. So they said you could try it, and some airports work that way and some don't. But if it does not work and you are required to do it this way, then you would put the departure airport for all Z's in 13, and in 18 down here, you would put the identifier for the airport and the name of the airport afterwards, following the letters DEP with a slash. That stands for departure airport. So let me write down an example of what that looks like. And that's what you would put in the remarks section. So now they know that this airport that you have up here, that is not an ICAO airport, is listed down here. Okay, going back to line 15, the cruising speed box, number 15, is where you will put your true airspeed. When filling this out, the airspeed has to be in a 4-digit number following the letter N. The letter N means that the number is in knots. If you're filing in kilometers per hour, you would use a K, so don't get them confused. The N stands for knots, the K stands for kilometers per hour. An example of a plane filing at 110 knots would be N0110. That would be what you would put in there for 110 knots. The level refers to the cruising altitude you will be flying. The altitude is written with the letter A followed by a 3-digit cruising altitude in hundreds of feet. For example, if you planned on cruising at 4,000 feet, you would put A040. If you wanted to cruise at 6,500 feet, you would put A065. So in this example, we're going to pretend we're cruising at 4,000 feet. So we're going to put the A in there, put 040 would be 4,000 feet. If we were cruising at the flight levels above 18,000 feet, you would do the same thing, except you would substitute the A with an F for flight levels. So remember, A for altitude, F for flight levels. The route is a section where you put all the points between the departure and the destination airports. If you are flying from one fix to another, you need to write down all the waypoints separated by DCT, which stands for direct to. For example, Northbrook VOR would be OBK, then you would put DCT. Rockford VOR would be RFD, then you would put DCT. Polo VOR would be PLL. So if you're flying between those, you would have DCT between each one of those sections. If you're flying along a published route, then list all the fixes along that route separated by a space instead of using the direct to symbol. In line 16, we have our destination aerodrome. That's our destination airport. The same rules apply here as if they did when you fill out the departure airport information. If you're using 4 Z's for your destination airport, then you have to put the identifier of the airport and the name of the airport on line 18 again, following the letters DEST with a slash. That stands for destination. So before we used our departure airport, and this one would be destination. Okay, we're just going to put Cedar Rapids in here for example. That would be our destination airport, Cedar Rapids, with our route of flight being OBK to Rockford to Polo, and then there. Just a note, you can also use line 18 for remarks. For example, you didn't want any flight plan that would take you over water and you want to put no over water in the remarks. You could put that also in the section 18. The box next to the destination airport is where you put your total estimated elapsed time, shown as total EET. This is just the estimated time to fly to your destination, written in hours and minutes. This is okay for domestic trips, but more detail is needed for international flying. Our total time to the airport would go here in hours and minutes. Our total flight time, for example, let's say an hour and 20 minutes. So we put 0, 1, 2, 0 as our time en route. Our alternate airports would go right here. If you have any alternates, you would put it in alternate aerodrome or second alternate aerodrome if you have two alternates. The supplementary section is next here. And this information is not going to be transmitted with a flight plan, but it is kept for emergency purposes. It's like for search and rescue information. So starting with number 19, next to the E, where there's E and a slash, this is where you put the total fuel available in hours and minutes. So we're going to assume that we have 5 hours and 20 minutes of fuel. So we would put 0520 for our fuel. 5 hours and 20 minutes of fuel on board. Next to that, there's a P, and this stands for the people on board the airplane. How many people do you have on board? This is where you would put the total amount of people on board. So we have just 2 people in this example, and that will complete that. So remember, this section is more for search and rescue information. So we have the E, that stands for the endurance, for how much fuel we have. We have P, for that stands for how many people on board. Now we have R. This is for the type of radio, emergency radios you have available in your airplane. Now we have UHF radio, VHF radio, and ELT. If you have an ELT, you would leave that marked. If you have a VHF radio that can transmit on 121.5, you would leave that in there. But most small planes do not have a UHF radio, so we would put an X through that. So this is showing we have R, we have radios on board, and these are the 2 types of radios we have. The survival equipment section is not required in the ICAO flight plans. To use this section, you would put the letter S in the first box to indicate that you have the specific survival equipment on board, and then put the first letter of the item listed that you have, such as P for polar, D for desert, M for maritime, and J for jungle. So right here, if we had any of this survival equipment right here, we would put an S right here, and since we don't have any of that equipment, then we're just going to put an X through it right there. So if we had some of this equipment in here, if we had desert equipment, for example, we would X out every one of the things that we don't have, and we would leave, and this would have an S in it, and we would leave desert there. But since we don't have any of the equipment here, we can just X out the very beginning where the S would go, and that leave that the way it is. The jackets section refers to life jackets. Now, this is also not required for domestic ICAO flights. To use this section, you would put the letter J in the first box right here, just as we talked about. But since we don't have any of this equipment right here, we're just going to X it out again. If we did have it, we would mark J, we would cross off the ones we don't have, and we leave the ones showing that we do have. The dinghies section is also not required. This is where you would put the number of dinghies you have. Dinghies are like life rafts. And the capacity of the total of them, whether they're covered or not, and the color. So if we had a dinghy here, we would put right here, we would put the number of dinghies. If we had 3 dinghies, we would put a 0 here and a 3 here. And the capacity is the total capacity of all the dinghies. So if each of the 3 dinghies can hold 3 each, then we would have a total capacity of 9. And you would put a C here if they're covered, and if it's not covered, you would exit out. And we'd write down the color here. Because we don't have any dinghies, we just have to X out the D in the beginning here that specifies dinghy. The aircraft color and marking section is just like you would do in any airplane, where you write down the basic main color of the airplane and then secondary colors, and that would go after A for the aircraft color. So if we have a white and red aircraft, and if it had gold stripes, you can even write gold stripes and leave it like that. The remarks section after the N right here, this is remarks where you would put notes about the survival equipment. If we don't really have any survival equipment to talk about and we don't have any notes or don't want to put any remarks there, we would X out the end there, showing that we don't have any notes in that section. And the last section is our pilot and command section, where we would put our pilot and command. All right. And that just leaves the last line where it says filed by, accepted by, and additional information. It's not necessary for you to fill anything out here or file anything, but you could put something there for your own notes, maybe showing who accepted your flight plan or any additional information, like maybe who you're going to close a flight plan with or something like that. When filing this flight plan, you tell the briefer you'd like to file an ICAO flight plan for domestic operations. And then you would read through the items just as you would read through any other flight plan, starting at the top with your aircraft identification number, the flight rules, the type of flight, and you just go through each of these items and read the letters in there and go through the whole thing all the way down the line. After filing the flight plan, you can confirm that it has been received and accepted, or you may not be able to use it if they don't accept it. So make sure it's been accepted and confirmed. So that's it. This is how to file an ICAO flight plan. I hope this helps. It's really not that difficult. There's not much more different about it than anything else. There are some terms and some abbreviations that are different. I've given you a list of some of them. If you need to do any international flying or you need different codes, you might have to do a little research to find that information. But this is just for general aviation airplanes, the basic stuff you would use on a general aviation flight. So I hope this helped. Also, if you'd like the link to the ICAO website where I found the aircraft codes, I'll put that on my website for you at flightinstructorjoe.com.